Hello and welcome to Access Chat. It's just the three of us today. We are entering June, and that means that it's Pride Month. Now, whilst the LGBTQIA+++ community is celebrating their identity, I think that it also opens up a conversation for us to have about disability identity. And I know there is a separate Disability Pride Month, which follows on, but also intersectionality. And certainly we know from conversations that we've had previously on Access Chat and amongst ourselves as well, that we can learn a lot from the Pride movement in terms of engagement, driving change, and also really being able to enable the conversations, because Pride has done a lot to address stigma, to engage society, to really change people's views of what it means to have, to be LGBTQIA+++ and have a different sexual identity from what society used to expect. So likewise, there's been a tremendous amount of stigma attached to disability, and particularly to a lot of hidden conditions and neurodivergent conditions, especially when it comes to things where learning disabilities and stuff like that, where people still feel ashamed about talking about it. So I think that any kind of celebration of positivity and identity that helps people feel comfortable is beneficial. At the same time, and I think Deborah can come in on this, in the DEI community and space in general, there's always days of celebration. And so sometimes I think we get this sort of celebratory fatigue. So maybe Deborah, you'd like to come in and say a bit about that, what's good and also where we could maybe preserve a little energy.
Well, and also, I just want to say, I like when it's the three of us. And I love when we have guests, but I love when it's the three of us talking, because we have such varied backgrounds and many years of doing this. We're on our 10th year now, so of doing this show. But, I think you're right, Neil, that we get... sometimes it feels hard to celebrate. I mean, I celebrated GAD. We all celebrated GAD. But at the same time, you see some troubling accessibility trends that it makes you nervous. And you think, should we be celebrating, or we should be getting out there working? And then it's like, no, let's take the time to celebrate. But let's really also at the same time look around and see where we are. And I love what you said about the LGBTQIA plus community, because they are a very diverse community. They have very different needs, different ideas of how the world should work for them, and to bring together a community that a lot of people want to shame or whatever. I talk about a very, very hard thing to do, and yet they still did it enough so that they got marriage equality in some ways. But I think the fight for true inclusion, I think the LGBTQIA plus, they've got a lot of work to do, and they actually need to probably get back together even more to see where do we go from here. And of course, we're trying to do that here at with our community. We're trying to get people to come together, like you said, Neil. Some people are ashamed to come out and talk about I talk about my ADHD, and often when I talk about it, people are like, oh yeah, you get it. But every once in a while, I talk about it in a different space, and I can feel the judgment and the sort of for example, the other day, somebody was almost getting a little irritated with me because I would not sit down. And I want to sit down. I want to sit down for 8-10 hours a day like some people do. I can't do it. I'm too hyper to do that. And so I was sort of explaining, well, it's a little bit my ADHD. It just makes me really a little hyper. And it was just sort of interesting having to explain that again, because I thought we had gotten so much past this. And so I love that we celebrate, and I agree with everything you were saying, Neil. We need to keep celebrating. But as we were saying before we got on air today, um, there's a lot of things breaking down, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's scary and hard to watch, but I do think we need to really continue to celebrate. We were talking about GAD, how amazing GAD 2024 was this year, but where can GAD go now? And what can we all do to get behind it? And so, how do we celebrate, but also make sure we're having truly meaningful change along the way is also interesting. Let me turn it over to you, Antonio.
Well, you were talking about community. I think to fair, the LGBT community there's a stronger sense of community even internationally. People are more connected, organizations are more connected. When people travel, there's that element is there. While in terms of disability, you might have local communities, you might have some people who somehow exchange ideas at an international level, but is not as consistent as it could be. Some people don't even know what others are doing. Some people are completely unaware about some work that is being done in countries that people are not. Some organizations, they create events that relate to their countries. Disability Pride Months or others that in some countries they don't even know what that is. So I think there's some initiatives that need to be done, and maybe some outreach to be done in order to make the community stronger, or at least to be able to, in some important cases and situations, to have us all supporting in order to find ways to progress faster.
Yeah, I agree.
I think there's definitely, that the higher visibility and greater connectiveness in the Pride movement. I think we are still pretty disparate within the disability communities. We haven't really come together. We need to. We talk about it a lot on this show, but it's still quite disparate. And if we look at how Pride has engaged with business as a umbrella movement for all of the different groups within that community, I think that they've been very successful, and that we can learn from that. And there was, a lot of positivity and a positive focus. And I think that maybe there is some less positivity among some of the sort of disability community, and that's hard, right? Because actually, there are reasons why people are less positive, right? And they're valid, right? Living with ableism, living with barriers, living with all of these things has an impact on people's well-being and their mental health. So guess what? Aside from it being GAD, last month was also Mental Health Month. And so, yes, it's no wonder we're tired, because we're celebrating multiple things. But I do think that there's something that they've managed to do. They've bottled up a secret sauce where, organizations have bought into it. They want to understand it. Because if you think about it, actually, around the world, there's far less protective legislation around sexuality than there is around disability. We've got more legislation on the side of disability non-discrimination, hundreds of different bits of legislation, which everyone bloody ignores. So, whereas actually in many parts of the world, it's still illegal. It's still frowned upon to be to be homosexual, to have a different sexual identity. So there is real risk and danger, and at the same time, the positivity and celebratory nature of Pride has meant that it's engaged, and it has brought steps forward. So if we're to think about, you say they've achieved marriage equality in many countries now. We haven't achieved that for people with disabilities.
Nope. You can't do that in the United States.
No.
Yep.
So I think that we still have some learning that we can do. And when I mean learning, it's not go, oh, well, they've managed to do this, but it's a how How did they manage to persuade? What was it? What was the thing that they did that convinced people to change their minds? Because I think that's the thing. We had a conversation a few weeks ago about diplomacy, but diplomacy only works if you understand what motivates the person on the other side of the conversation. And I think that's where they've done a really good job.
I think at certain level, particularly on the business topics, I think it has been a lot easier for CEOs and executives to come out and say,
agree,
and then provide ways to support the community, support people in their organizations. Now you have seen many executives who were able to come out and say, no, this is who I am. This is and then that had a positive role in the organization, in the people around them, and they were very confident doing it. And you don't see that at the level of in our community. You don't see a CEO come and say, oh, I have a disability. No, it's still very hard for people to say it in the same way. And I think that somehow at the business level, those executives who from the LGBT community who were in senior positions contributed very positively to what has happened. And the fact that they were in the position of power also helped to escalate and amplify and make things happen and run faster.
And I don't know if this is true, and I do not want to minimize these topics, but it seems to me also that there's a lot of complications with including the LGBTQIA plus. A lot of complications. It seems to me most of the efforts I see are in westernized countries. Many countries are not looking at all about what the rights should be for the LGBTQIA. And sadly, if you are a man that is a homosexual, in some countries, you can get killed.
No.
You can get arrested and
Deborah,
killed.
let me just intersect to say something important. Is that something that I have observed is that many people live in those countries. When they have the opportunity, they immigrate. They move to a different place.
Right.
Yeah.
Because why you're not accepted where you are. But the point. So I'm not. I think there's major issues in that community. But I think when you start getting into our community, the disability community, it seems like, not that this is a suffering Olympics, but it seems like it's so much more complicated because we have so many different people that have been thrown in. Most people don't want to admit it. And at the same time, then we also have access issues in a different way than other communities have. Because our community, they might be blind, or they might be deaf, or maybe they can't use their hands, or maybe they can't. And so we are fighting multiple things, because we also have to fight for technology to be included for us to be inclusive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think we can learn so much from that community, so much about them getting together and fighting for their rights and fighting for each other's rights, and to coming out with pride. I appreciate what they've done. I just think for both communities, it's a ridiculous, nuanced efforts. And of course, there's the intersectionality of it all, where we're all, women with disabilities that are part of the LGBT, or men, and blah, blah, blah. So,
absolutely. I think you raised a good point. I mean, I'm going to sound glib now, but it costs a lot less to change a sign on the toilet door than it does to actually fit an accessible toilet and change the room and put in place, changing places, toilets, right? That requires physical changes to your infrastructure rather than just attitudinal ones. So we have the physical, attitudinal, and then the technological requirements around disability. So I acknowledge the complexity as well. And I think that if we go to the attitudinal one for a bit, I think that, yes, Antonio's right. Many of the CEOs that are part of the LGBT community have been excellent role models. But when we examine prejudice, the prejudice against sexuality doesn't question people's competence. When we look at ableism, people assume that because you are disabled, that you're incompetent. So there's an additional barrier to for senior leaders who don't want to admit that they're human and fallible, because the perception is that in order to be successful, you've got to be highly competent, and that we still have this innate prejudice that disability equals lack of competence, or that you're unable to perform in certain ways. And we know, working in the field, that's not the case, but you have to put in the supports to enable people. And so that those multiple layers of complexity, I do think, then make it somewhat harder.
Yeah, I thought that was such a brilliant point that you made. So compliments.
Thank you. So this is a short episode, so but I do want to, wish the intersectionality of our two and multiple communities, happy Pride Month. May you continue to celebrate. May we continue to celebrate our identities and everybody's identities, because it's important that everybody can be their true selves. And I think that by not being our true selves, it has a negative impact. So the positive impact of people being able to be themselves in public, and the ripple effects of that are significant. So happy Pride Month. Look forward to discussing this further on Access Chat, and I need to say thank you to our friends and sponsors, Amazon and MyClearText, for keeping us on air and captioned.